Okay, so this is going to be my list, my short reviews of my favourite movies in 2024. First, there's going to be my recommendations, then some honourable mentions, and finally, the disasters. First up, the recommendations. For me, the movie of the year is clearly Dune Part 2. The music, the art direction, the costumes, the special effects, the acting. Part 2 clearly hit the landing from Part 1, and in terms of movies to analyse and enjoy over the long term, I think it's far and away the greatest movie of the year. I don't think it's an unmitigated success. The only aspect of the story that I felt kind of slightly let down about was how the characters of Paul and his mother changed so quickly from the more vulnerable humans we saw in Part 1 into, I don't know how to put it, worm juice slaves? Is that the right way to put it? Yeah, how their characters changed felt a little bit too quick, but I'm open to changing my mind on that on rewatches because this is a movie I'm sure I'll rewatch several times. I enjoyed the controversial change about Chani at the end of the movie. It felt a bit more realistic than in the book, for me at least. So, in terms of movies as a serious art form, far and away the best movie of the year. And my only other major recommendation would be Deadpool and Wolverine. And I'd recommend this for completely different reasons to Dune Part 2. While the Villeneuve adaptations of Dune are quite possibly on their way to becoming classic sci-fi, Deadpool and Wolverine feels like more of a temporary indulgence, an ephemeral and affectionate trade on past glories. This is the only movie that I've been to in the past 5 years, probably since Infinity War maybe, where the cinema was more than half full. It's very much in the spirit of Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, that kind of thing, meant to be enjoyed just to celebrate cinema, just to have fun, something that seems rare in modern movie and TV productions. Yes, Deadpool and Wolverine made over $1 billion, but I don't think it signals a revival of the MCU or of comic book movies in general. In fact, the number of jokes it makes at the MCU's expense, I think, only confirms that Hollywood's forgotten how to make decent comic book movies. It's basically an Irish funeral for the MCU, dancing on its grave because that's the only joy left to get out of post-Endgame Marvel movies. So as far as outright recommendations go, those two are pretty much all I've got. But let's move on to the honourable mentions, the first of which is Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. This is a decent film and would probably be a much better film if it wasn't in the Mad Max universe. There's so much good stuff. The lore of the universe is sufficient to be credible, but isn't overly complicated. I really enjoy the acting performances. Chris Hemsworth is probably my favourite, but Anya Taylor-Joy is also really good, and so is Tom Burke. I liked Anya Taylor-Joy's take on the character of Furiosa. Unfortunately, I just liked Charlize Theron more. I don't see a good reason to get rid of her after just one movie, especially when Mad Max himself is absent. For me, that's a double whammy that takes Furiosa from potentially something great to just an honourable mention. Next, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, a really well-told story, a decent Henry Cavill movie for once, which I found a little bit overacted in that Guy Ritchie heightened reality cartoon universe way. I'd rather read the book for this kind of stuff, because with stories about special forces, often the reality can be so unusual, it's hard to portray in visual media. So, Ministry, worth a watch, but more like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels than Saving Private Ryan. I also really enjoyed The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. It's a film that wasn't worth going to the cinema for. It's entertaining, but it's fluff. The kind of thing that in the 21st century should really go straight to streaming, not worth a trip outside for. In fact, I couldn't even find the enthusiasm to make a review of it at the time. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was another movie I liked, but I've not put it in recommendations, as I think its ultimate fate depends on A, if there's a sequel, and B, if the sequel is any good. The CGI is brilliant here. I really bought into the monkey characters. The ending of the movie, it feels a bit tacked on, it feels a bit last moment. It dropped a few big questions that made some people unhappy, but on balance, I thought they were interesting questions, and I'd love to see a sequel that answered them. And I guess a couple more honourable mentions, just very quickly, would be Beetlejuice 2, which I thought was acceptable. It was fun, I'd enjoy it again. And also Bad Boys Ride or Die. Very old-fashioned, i.e. just competent and entertaining. And that brings me to the disasters. I guess the biggie, the real flaming jobby, is Rebel Moon. So bad it was the worst movie 3 times in 2024, with Part 2 Scargiver and its slow motion farming, and the 2 director's cuts, which are less awful than the originals, but still really bad. My overall feeling on all 4 of the films is there's just too much story, too much being crammed in for it to be possible to work. Just the flashbacks alone feel they could be their own movie or their own trilogy. So the sheer scope of the project is just too big. But I guess there's also the fact that individual scenes lack their own internal logic. So maybe I'm being too generous to think that Rebel Moon could easily be fixed. But I did find them kind of compelling disasters in some sense. And then towards the end of the year, there was Joker 2, with a budget of $200 million that went up in flames on a movie where the makers seem to hate the first film, hate anyone who liked the first film, apparently hate their own careers as well. Despite the level of its failure, I think Joker 2 will still be a culturally significant event, not only for this year, but maybe for the 2020s as a whole. Compared to Rebel Moon, for example, I think Rebel Moon and Zack Snyder feels like a hangover from the 2010s. But it was interesting with Rebel Moon that by the time the director's cuts came around, very few people seemed actually interested in it. Whereas I think Joker 2 will be dissected both as a movie and as a zeitgeist event, a cultural phenomenon, for a while yet. The narrative around the Joker 2, the discussion of how and why the movie flopped, is much more interesting than the movie in many ways. And a final disaster, I guess Madam Web deserves a quick mention. This wasn't Joker 2 bad, it's just another superhero movie made by people who don't like and don't understand superhero movies, and is therefore stunningly average, I suppose. Similarly, Argylle from the beginning of the year I thought was actually worse than Madam Web, and is another entry in the Henry Cavill being misused canon. Beyond the disasters, I guess we've got The Slop. Gladiator 2, perfectly competent, never watch it ever again. Transformers 1, Atlas. The Slop just doesn't stop. There's so many sequels, prequels, remakes that I just couldn't be bothered watching this year. But hey, I guess that's what the movie industry is now. Thanks for watching.